Today, we're extremely lucky to have a visionary with us, someone who is not afraid to speak the truth about Wall Street or any other shady enterprise. He's the CEO of Overstock.com, and it's my pleasure to welcome Patrick Byrne to In the Money Stock Market Action on 820 AM News Talk Radio. How are you, Mr. Byrne?
Gareth, please call me Patrick, and it's an honor for me to be on.
Absolutely, Patrick. Thank you so much. And again, one thing, I've seen multiple interviews you've done in the past, and one thing that always inspires me is that you're not afraid to speak the truth and just say what's on your mind. And again, I think that's so important in today's day and age. There's so much nonsense going on. But to get started,
well, thank you. Just as a general suggestion life is so much easier if you just speak the truth. I don't view it like I'm getting up every day and going out and picking fights with you. I'm just speaking the truth. There's a lot less to remember. If all you're going to do is speak the truth, there's a lot less to remember.
That is so true. I couldn't agree with that more. Less to remember for sure. But just getting started, I was always curious, and this is just from my personal understanding. Could you tell us a little bit how you started Overstock.com? Like, what inspired you to get it started back in the late 1990s?
Well, I was actually working for Mr. Buffett at the time, and I was on the edge of retirement. I owned my own company, sold it, was just at the point of retiring. I thought I was going to teach. This idea came along. There was a flea market business that was supplying people in the flea market industry, and it had collapsed. And on the day they shut their doors, I stepped in and bought it and bought a controlling stake. And 4 months later, we launched the website Overstock.com. So it originally kind of came out of the flea market supply business, but I like to think that we've come a long way in terms of, our products now are not flea market products. There's, Rolexes and stuff.
Absolutely. I happen to have bought many, many things from Overstock.com, and it's always been a great thing. It's never had an issue, and it's always gotten to me very, very quickly. So return customer here.
The more you spend, the more you save, Gareth. Don't spend $1 more than you want to save.
Exactly. Now, I was just curious. I was just looking over, I happened to just look over the Overstock.com chart today, and, it seems like it's such a value right there. If you compare it to something like Amazon.com, Amazon basically makes almost no money, and you guys are continuing to deliver profitable quarters after profitable quarters. Is there anything why do you think that Amazon has this valuation as opposed to you guys, which has such a good kind of firm valuation, like it's in reality,
Well, I'm a total value guy. I grew up in the value school. I've been a value guy since I was 13. So one of the precepts of value investing is you buy a share of stock if and only if you would buy it knowing the market we're going to shut down for 10 years tomorrow. You still buy that share of stock. You still want that slice of the company. The corollary is when you run a company, you run it as if there's no public market. So I don't really care. I don't care personally about the stock price. I'm interested in it. We're just focusing on building a great business, and in the long run, the stock takes care of itself. I have been interested in it in the sense of it has been a window into some shenanigans on Wall Street. Why does Amazon have such a higher valuation? I don't know what I don't know. $1 of our earnings feels just as heavy as $1 of their earnings. $1 of our earnings has a very low PE, and they have some, and what is it, 100, 200 PE, some ridiculous thing.
Yeah,
so, yeah, we get 3 or 4, and we 2 years ago we earned more money than them in an absolute sense and on a per share basis. Last year, we earned more money than them on a per-share basis. If you're a value investor, you're all about, looking for, it's all earnings per share. But I want to make clear to your listeners, I'm not trying to tell anyone to buy our stock. I never try to pump our stock or tell people. In fact, there have been times I've gone public and I said I think people should stay away from our stock, given some of the characters who had gotten involved on the short side. Who seemed to have a lot of games they could play, and I thought it was kind of risky for a retail investor. But I think we have a great business opening up. I think we have great earnings per share, and I've actually said publicly my goal is to keep our earnings per share higher than Amazon's. I don't know if it would be that way this year, but I think it can. I think that's a reasonable sort of middle range goal. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting if we can have higher per share earnings than they do over time, it will at some point, I would think, the market would either have to say they're way overvalued or we're undervalued. And the way, I'm sure you know the way to play that is you buy one and short the other, but I'm not recommending either strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, just for our listeners, and this is just my personal thing, is that if I look at what's the riskier play, would I rather be long Overstock or Amazon? I would rather be long Overstock, just because again, it's got that firm earnings behind it. It's a much lower price point as opposed to Amazon, which in many ways I think is up on hot air, and eventually you'll have to have a reckoning day where the fundamentals, the earnings per share, eventually do mean something. So that's a great point there. I was just curious, and I don't know if you can even comment on this. Is there ever a sense of picking up other online retailers to kind of form a bigger alliance against Amazon, or it's like, nah, it's not even worth it, just continue to focus on what you guys do best?
Well, we don't, in a sense we are building that alliance because we're providing some back-end services now in a way that benefit other websites, and you'll hear I think more of them coming down the pike. So in a technological sense, we are in an alliance. Although I really focus most on, I don't pay nearly as much attention to the competitors as I probably should, or certainly, we know our competitors have competitive intelligence functions and they're always snooping around trying to find stuff out. We don't do that. We just stick to our knitting and try to figure out every day how to do things a little bit better. And if we just keep coming in day by day, getting better, and leave it to the other guys to try to keep up. But we don't really focus on them.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. So now I want to shift gears a little bit, and I kind of want to go towards your views on a few other topics out there. And the first thing, something I've talked about to our listeners quite often is, the Federal Reserve and them printing this, endless supply of money, $4 trillion in the last 5 years or so. Are you a fan of the Fed? Do you think what the Fed has done has been beneficial? Has it helped the average American or hurt? What are your thoughts on the Federal Reserve?
Well, it is definitely not beneficial to the country. We absolutely should dismantle it. Milton Friedman was once asked in 1992 in an interview with the Minneapolis branch of the Federal Reserve, in their publication, did an interview with him where they said, what's the most important issue facing America? And it's the most important issue facing America is how do we get rid of you, the Federal Reserve? And you need a lender of last resort. If you're going to have fractional reserve banking, I think you need a lender of last resort, which was the original mandate of the Federal Reserve. But it greatly expanded that into thinking it could micromanage the economy, and I think that's nuts. I lived in communist China back when it was still communist. I lived there in the early 80s. I'm very familiar with the Soviet era. And they end up running their societies with a great big set of bureaucrats in a place called, in Soviet case, Gosplan or something. That the Soviet Union, they were setting 23 million prices by hand. So there wasn't a market system. There was you had apparatchiks setting prices for every good, 23 million goods in society, right down to the screws that went into the casters under the shopping cart or something, and that's a silly, it's laughable. How would you try to run a society by setting 23 million prices like that? But in our society, the most important price we face is the price at which we discount the future against the present, which is to say interest rates. And what we have is a central planning agency setting those, and that central planning agency is a central bank called the Federal Reserve. It's a horrible institutional design. We shouldn't do it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it ultimately will, I actually think down the line it could be the undoing of the financial system based on everything that they're doing now. But, maybe they have a plan for that. I don't know, But are you
they have a plan. The plan's silly.
Yeah.
They have a plan. Their plan is silly. They're dreaming. You know what they're like? You know how there are Wall Street traders? I see that you're very familiar with Wall Street. You know how there's Wall Street traders that have basically blown up different firms by they do something like they sell long-dated out-of-the-money puts, and then they book it as income. And that may be a little technical sounding. I'm sure you know what I mean. But they can take a bet that pays off 9 days out of 10 or 9 years out of 10. And 9 years out of 10, you make $1 million, but then in the 10th year, you lose $100 million. Buffett calls it a business of picking up dimes in front of a steamroller. Well, that's really what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're doing this stuff that, they're not just the QE, but Operation Twist that they've done, and the taking in the average duration of outstanding Treasury instruments has come way down in this administration. What they're doing is they're in a sense doing something that creates some good results today, but it's building up a bigger and bigger chance of a bad event, and that event is going to wipe out all the dimes that they picked up along the way. Someday they're going to hit by the steamroller. I can't believe. I mean, they know this. It's a very reckless strategy. It's an abominably reckless strategy.
Yeah, it seems to me like, they're creating every bubble, and then they're trying to bail themselves out by doing this, and then it just creates another bigger bubble down the line that is going to be more catastrophic, and the poor average American is getting kind of caught in the middle of it.
Yeah, I knew a crackhead who had the same strategy. That's basically their strategy. I'm going to smoke some crack and get high, and then when I come down, I'll just got to smoke some more, and you got to smoke more and more and more and more. Well, what kind of, that's our monetary strategy. I don't even think they have a strategy. I think they've driven down a cul-de-sac. I think there's one guy, Peter Schiff, says they've driven into the monetary roach motel. There's no exit. Once you start trying to prop up your economy by doing this nonsense, there's no exit. You can't ever get back. You just have to give it bigger and bigger and bigger doses until at some point, reality happens.
Yeah, until you kill the patient, right? Or kill the drug addict.
Yeah, or you have to take them off completely, or else the patient dies. And when you do that, the withdrawal is far worse than if you had confronted the profligacy up front.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Now, just going to politicians, I think our average listener is kind of always looking for that politician who really speaks the truth, who isn't swayed by the lobbyists and everything. Is there anyone out there that we can look to going forward that you know of? I mean, is there anyone who you get behind and say, he speaks the truth, he's got the right angle on the markets?
Well, let me leave aside the last part of your question, but to the first part of your question, there's no one who speaks the truth. Yes, first numbers 1, 2, and 3 are Ron Paul, and Ron Paul. Ron Paul was the only guy who got this or understood reality. Now, as far as the markets go, I don't know. I don't think he comments on the markets, but his understanding the underlying mechanisms, it's Ron Paul. These other guys, I don't like making. It's funny as strong as my political beliefs are, I don't like making anyone's job harder for them. I try not to criticize our president too hard. Guy's in a tough spot, don't want to make his job too hard for him. But he just suffers from a bunch of advisors who have a terrible philosophy and worldview. But that extends back through George Bush. That extends, I don't know how many decades that extends back. But basically, maybe since the creation of the Federal Reserve, none of these guys understand reality other than Ron Paul, Rand Paul, and people of that ilk.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think about the meteoric rise in the stock market? I mean, I look at the stock market myself, and I talk to our members and the listeners and so forth, and I talk about how ultimately it's Fed-driven, money printing driven, and artificially keeping interest rates low. But eventually that merry-go-round must stop. I mean, when you look at the markets, do you have that same feeling that eventually we've got to see another large pullback because of what they've been doing?
Yes, what they're doing is when you release this many trillions of dollars into the economy, they're once again reflating a bubble. They're trying to tell us we have a recovery. We don't have a recovery, and we've reflated a bubble, and we're calling it a recovery. And what they're trying to generate is a wealth effect. So if you have a 401k with $200,000 in it, and your stocks goes way up this year, and you have $400,000, you feel like you made $200,000, and you go out and spend 50 of it. That 50 drives this extra economic activity this year, and so that's how they're pumping things up. But it's just a terrible strategy, and it works well until the day it doesn't. But on the day it stops working, there'll be something they can't control. And it's exactly what they did with the housing. I mean, they were inflating a housing bubble in part to drive a wealth effect, make people feel wealthy because their $500,000 house went to an $800,000 house, and they think, I spent $300,000. I'm going to go and take a vacation in Disneyland, and so they can stimulate this extra economic activity, but it's all phony. It's not based on any fundamentals. It's just based on them turning on the spigot.
Yeah, and one thing I always say to the listeners as well is that, and it's the unfortunate game that's played by Wall Street and by these Federal Reserves, like how you have the little investor now. I mean, there's so much data showing the little investors pushing all their money in now to the markets, just like they did in '07, and it's just a transfer of wealth, it seems to me, where all of a sudden the markets will decline and they lose all their money, they'll sell at the lows, and it's just kind of a repeating cycle. I mean, it is sad to see that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I mean, it's so, I hate to sound like a lefty, but at the end of the day, we are turning into an oligarchy. This is how republics die. We have a financial elite that overextends themselves, gets propped up. On good years, they make a ton of money. In bad years, they get propped up by a government, and the government is getting that money from you, from your listeners. So effectively, the political economy of it is it's just a big ripoff of the American people to make some, as Rolling Stone put it, it's some rich bankers bailing out rich bankers on your credit card.
Absolutely. Now just speaking about ways to kind of fight back against the printing of money, I know you're a big advocate of Bitcoin, and Overstock.com has recently started accepting that payment. I mean, do you think Bitcoin will become the wave of the future in terms of the way we all do transactions? I mean, is that where it's headed?
I think it may. I certainly do not recommend Bitcoin as an investment. I try to make this clear. My admiration of Bitcoin has nothing to do with the valuation or saying what kind of investment it is. It's a great medium of exchange. It's such a better mousetrap. I would imagine that it's anyway. So it's such a better mousetrap. I do anticipate it will at least get adoption like PayPal, and it may get even more significant adoption.
Okay, interesting. And do you think that there's a chance that at some point, if it does get more popular, the government will come in and try to kind of squash it a little bit? I mean, Visa, MasterCard, and Amex obviously have a lot to lose based on the fact that you can get around paying fees. I mean, is there any chance of that, or you think it's something that'll just kind of take its own course and become bigger?
I think if the government doesn't act soon, it's going to get away from them. And it's not clear to me that the government does want to stop this or that it's in their interest to stop it. And the government's not monolithic. There are some people who probably hate it, and people who are involved in trying to track money launderers or something, and others who, although it's not, it's not anonymous. They always say it's anonymous, but it's not really. It's pseudonymous, I think is the word. You have a pseudonym. They can track things back to a pseudonym. Now, they may not be able to track who the pseudonym is, but they can track everything about what that pseudonym is doing through Bitcoin. So it's not as, people act like it's inevitably entwined with illegal activity, but it really isn't, because it's not completely anonymous like cash, for example.
Yeah, that's the one thing that dawned on me. I love the idea of Bitcoin, but it does raise the idea that technically every purchase, I mean, if we only use Bitcoin, every purchase would be 100% trackable. It's all becoming that way, and as opposed to going to the bank but getting $100 out of cash and going and spending it at various places where no one technically could say, oh, I see that transaction. So that's interesting.
But if you want to do that and get your $100 in cash, you can do that from a Bitcoin ATM machine and go spend it. Right now, if you spend money that's not cash, but it's any kind of credit card, that's all 100% trackable too.
Absolutely.
It's trackable right to your address. At least with Bitcoin, they can track it to a very long public keychain. But they still have to do some additional work to find out who that is. But if you're really that concerned about not having your stuff tracked, you can't use credit cards anyway.
Yes.
So it's at least as good as credit cards, but with a smaller possibility of getting ID theft.
That's a great point. That is a fantastic point. Now, do you have any opinion on what's going on in Russia with Ukraine and Crimea? I mean, anything like that? I mean, do you think that's the start of something bigger, or, I mean...
Well, Clausewitz said that war is politics by other means. Wars don't just happen. Wars happen from when you've got different powers engaged in political struggles, and eventually they reached some question. Normally, it's in everybody's interest to figure out, well, would we win if we were to fight this war, or would we lose? And if there's a clear answer to that, nobody actually has to fight. They can just go do whatever the outcome would have been if they did fight, and that's how international politics works. But we are reaching a point that, so first of all, I've confess a bit of a prejudice. I'm never been a fan of Russia, right back to the Duke of Muscovy 1,000 years ago. I think that Henry Kissinger said that when Russia had feudalism, it had the worst form of feudalism, which is to say serfdom. When it had communism, it had the worst form of communism, which is to say Stalinism and Leninism. And when it now that it has capitalism, it has the worst form of capitalism, which is to say kleptocracy. It's a horror, and that's not incidental. That comes right out of the DNA of the culture of Russia and Russian history, which is more than you probably want me to go into. There's a reason they always make these bad mistakes, and that they're just wedded to the strong man view of how you should run a country. So it's a giant kleptocracy. It's not remarkable to me that they did it. I think this was totally invited by U.S. policy going back to Georgia. I'm surprised it took 6 years for them to do it. And I think that the U.S. shouldn't go to war. But the parallels with the 1930s are so obvious, it's banal to even really talk about them too much. But if we don't, last comment I'll make. Winston Churchill said, an appeaser is one who believes he can convince the crocodile to eat him last. So I don't think we should appease. I think that we should, there are lots of things we can do. First step is they should be putting the ballistic, the missile defense system back in Poland and Czechoslovakia. Just in itself is an enormous black eye for Putin, would drive him nuts, and we ought to do that before we even talk to them. We ought to do that.
Yeah, no, that was one of the things I thought about too. Is just even the threat of putting that back could be a negotiating tool, at least in the very least. So I think that's a great point. And yeah, I mean,
I wouldn't even threaten with it. I wouldn't threaten it. I would just do it. And then
I was going to mention about the appeasement. You using those terms almost makes me think of Germany too in the 1930s and such. So yeah, it's kind of scary overall to just think about that power type thing going on there. To shift states here a little bit, I just had a curiosity question here. I heard you own a Tesla Model S, and I was just curious. Do you like it? I mean, do you recommend it? I was looking into possibly getting one myself.
Oh my gosh, I need to slip into something more comfortable every time I drive it. And I'm not a car guy. I mean, I'm not a guy. I actually had never owned a car that cost more than about $6,000 until 6 or 7 years ago. I went and bought an Audi, but then stand by just a moment. Yeah, this is a radio. So just tell them and then I bought an Audi about, 10 years ago, and I loved that. But then the first Tesla came out, the little Roadster, 0 to 60 in 2.7, which is like, being launched off a carrier, and it was great. But that was really just to get their name out there in the world. It was a tiny car, a little small for me. I can only drive it with the roof off in the summer. But they came out last year with this Model S. It is, it won the Car of the Year award, not just for electric, but for everything. It's so well designed and convenient. It's really, and I get 230 miles. I can take it up to 300 miles without a charge if I want. So it's a great, and it does 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, which is still great. It's half the speed, half the acceleration of the little Roadster, but it's still it's like driving an Audi that has about 30% better performance.
Oh, well, I think I'll be doing a little car shopping pretty soon then. That sounds great. Just curiosity as we wind this down, any predictions going forward? I mean, is there anything out there that you think we should all be kind of watching, whether we're as an investor or as just a citizen, as an American citizen?
Sure. I have at the risk of suffering from what I call creeping old fartism, I think that we're really in a precarious position. I don't know how long this. Too much has to go right for this country to make it through this decade without some serious dislocation. It's quite possible that dislocation is worse than 2008. There's even some chance it's worse than 1929. You want, I'm going to plug, you can go to Overstock and look up emergency preparedness. For a couple $100, you buy a backpack with 30 days supply of food and whistles and first aid kits and all these things that you should own and keep in your closet. The society will be much more robust if everybody has a 30-day supply of essentials in their closet.
Amazing. Yeah, it's funny, and just to wrap it up too, it's funny just to mention that I was just talking to my girlfriend about how I would love to have a bunker one day underneath the ground where I could stockpile some water and some food and just have that as a safety net. It's interesting that you bring that up. But is there anything
Listen,
else?
Everybody is thinking about this. They may not be saying it, but I can tell you, wherever I go in society, whatever strata, you scratch somebody, this is what they're thinking about. So it's not at all crazy.
Good to know. Now, if people want to follow you, do you have a Twitter or do you have a blog or anything? You have some great views. Is there any place they can go to kind of keep track of what you're saying and your updates?
Yes, there are. There's basically two ways. I have a blog called deepcapture.com, Deep Capture, and I started it in '07. I really started saying all this stuff '05, but it's about the capture of Washington by Wall Street, really the loss of our republic to Wall Street, and I do that. Or you can go to YouTube and search for my name, and you'll see hundreds of news appearances come up where I get to lay out my theories.
Excellent. That's amazing. And again, I'm going to keep track of the blog myself and follow you. And thank you so much, Patrick. Patrick Byrne, everyone. Pleasure to have you here. It's really been an honor. A great interview. And again, have a great rest of the day. And thank you again for coming and joining us today.
Gareth, anytime. It was a real honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.